The homeless man whispered hoarsely, "Don't move. Stay quiet." Emily Carter froze. She had just stepped out of her sleek black SUV when the ragged figure leaning against a brick wall caught her attention. At first, she thought he was only another shadow of the city night, dirty coat, unshaven face, a stray dog at his side. But then she saw his eyes, sharp and alert, not dulled by despair. And before she could speak, Rusty, the mutt, growled low. From the corner of her vision, a masked man emerged, knife glinting beneath the streetlight. Emily's breath caught. The knife rose, reflecting the harsh glow of neon buzzing overhead. She staggered back against her car, clutching her arm as her purse slipped to the ground. The ragged man straightened, stepping forward, despite his thin frame and ragged clothes. His voice rasped like gravel. "Stay behind me." The words came steady, commanding not what she expected from someone the world ignored. Rusty barked furiously, his teeth flashing white. The attacker hesitated, eyes darting between the billionaire in silk and the vagrant with nothing. For a heartbeat, the street froze, tension humming like a live wire. The man lunged. The knife slashed downward, a flash of steel in the dark. Emily gasped, but before the blade could find her, Jack Miller, the homeless stranger, stepped into its path. His cracked hands grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting with surprising strength. Rusty leapt, snapping at the man's leg, dragging him off balance. The masked figure cursed, fighting back. But Jack, shoved with the desperation of someone who had fought for survival his whole life. The knife clattered to the asphalt, spinning out of reach. Emily pressed against the SUV, frozen, watching the impossible unfold. The attacker snarled, shoving Jack against the wall. Pain ripped through Jack's ribs, but he gritted his teeth and held firm. Rusty barked wildly, lunging again, snapping at the man's coat. Emily's eyes locked on the knife, lying just a few feet away. She forced herself forward, heels striking the blade and kicking it farther. The attacker saw, cursed again, and tore free, stumbling into the dark alley. Within seconds, he was gone, swallowed by the shadows of the city. Silence descended, broken only by Emily's shallow breaths and Jack's ragged panting. Jack bent forward, hands on his knees, chest heaving. Rusty pressed close, hackles still raised. Slowly, Jack turned to face her. For the first time, Emily saw his face fully illuminated by the SUV's lights. His coat hung in shreds, his beard unkempt, but his eyes were steady, alive. She pressed a trembling hand against her bleeding arm. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Jack's voice cut through the silence, hoarse but firm. "Sit down." His tone left no room for argument. And for the first time in years, Emily Carter obeyed a command she did not give herself. She slid down onto the curb, the cold concrete soaking through her skirt. Jack crouched in front of her, tearing a strip from his filthy shirt. His cracked, weathered hands worked with surprising skill. He pressed the fabric hard against her wound, tying it tight. Emily hissed, biting her lip to keep from crying out, but she didn't pull away. He moved with focus, each knot firm, deliberate. He smelled of smoke, damp cardboard, the streets, and yet his touch carried something different. No hesitation, no fear, just determination, as though saving her was a task he'd done before. Emily studied him through the haze of pain. She was used to security guards, men who followed orders because she paid them well. But this stranger had nothing. No money, no reason, no protection of his own. Yet he had stepped in without question. She tried to speak, to ask his name, but her voice faltered. Rusty pressed his nose against her knee, tail thumping once before curling at her side. Emily let out a shaky laugh, absurd in the moment. A billionaire CEO on the ground, bleeding, wrapped in a homeless man's coat, guarded by a stray dog. Just minutes earlier, Emily Carter had left a late meeting with investors. The youngest female CEO in the Midwest, she had built Carter Dynamics into a billion-dollar tech empire. Success had given her power, but also enemies. She had always relied on bodyguards, drivers, security teams. Tonight, she thought she could manage a short drive alone. She hadn't seen the SUV tailing her until it forced her off the road. She had escaped the first attack, but not before the knife cut her arm. Now, she was stripped of all power, saved only by a man who had nothing. Jack tied the last knot and sat back on his heels. "Keep pressure on it," he muttered, his voice low but steady. Emily blinked, startled by his authority. She was used to commanding boardrooms, not being commanded, but she obeyed. Her hand pressed against the cloth, holding it firm. Rusty rested his head on her lap, eyes glowing amber in the SUV's beams. Emily's chest tightened with an emotion she couldn't name. She had walked past men like Jack 1,000 times without looking. Tonight, he was the only one between her and death. Her voice trembled. Why help me?" Jack's eyes shifted away, his jaw tightening. "Because no one else would." The words hit her harder than the wound. Emily had built her life on competition, on leaving others behind. She had stepped over the unseen, blind to their struggles. And yet, when she was most vulnerable, a man abandoned by the world had risked himself to save her. Shame and gratitude tangled inside her. She swallowed hard, whispering, "Thank you." Jack didn't respond. He just sat, scanning the shadows, his body still tense. Rusty pressed closer, his presence solid and grounding. The bleeding slowed under Jack's makeshift bandage. Still shivering, Emily hugged herself. Jack noticed, then pulled off his ragged coat and draped it around her shoulders. It smelled of smoke and rain, heavy with years of survival, but warmth seeped into her skin. She shivered, oddly comforted. She hadn't felt this kind of protection in years, not from her guards, not from her colleagues. Rusty nuzzled her gently, as though sensing her fear. Emily reached out, stroking his fur with trembling fingers. The dog wagged his tail. For the first time that night, Emily allowed herself to exhale. Jack stayed silent, eyes fixed on the alley. "They might come back," he muttered. Emily stiffened. "Why would they?" His shrug was curt. "You're worth something." The bluntness chilled her. She had always known her wealth painted a target on her back. But hearing it from him, from someone who knew what it meant to be preyed upon, made it real. She pulled his coat tighter, heart hammering. All her money, her power, meant nothing here. In the end, her life depended on a man society treated as less than nothing. Her eyelids drooped, exhaustion pressing down. Jack nudged her shoulder. "Stay awake." His tone was sharp, commanding. Emily forced her eyes open. No one had spoken to her like that in years. Not her board, not her staff, not even her rivals. She was always the one in control. Tonight, control was gone. And yet, obeying this man didn't feel demeaning. It felt safe. She leaned back against the concrete, focusing on his voice. For the first time in a long time, Emily Carter wasn't running the show, and strangely, she didn't hate it. Jack began to speak, his words clipped but steady. He told her how he had found Rusty half-starved in an alley, how they had survived winters in abandoned warehouses, living on scraps and hope. He spoke without self-pity, only fact. Emily listened, drawn in despite the pain. His story stripped away the layers of her assumptions. This man, whom she would have dismissed without thought, carried strength and loyalty in his bones. More than many men in her world of polished glass towers, she realized she wanted to hear more, not out of pity, but respect. Rusty lifted his head suddenly, ears pricked. Jack tensed, scanning the dark. Emily's heart raced. Shadows flickered at the far end of the street. Her hand tightened on the bandage, pulse quickening. Jack shifted forward, putting himself between her and the threat. "Stay behind me," he said firmly. Emily froze, breath caught. No one had stood in front of her like that since her father long ago. She was used to standing alone, to fighting for her empire. But tonight, she didn't argue. She let him shield her, and the feeling, terrifying as it was, carried a strange relief. The shadows faded, only drifting shapes. Rusty calmed, his tail lowering. Jack eased back, his muscles unwinding slowly. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Without thinking, she leaned into him, her head brushing his shoulder. He stiffened, but didn't pull away. His coat smelled of smoke and dampness, but beneath it, he was warm, solid, steady. For years, Emily had surrounded herself with people who wanted something from her. This man wanted nothing, asked for nothing. His silence was stronger than any contract she had ever signed, and for the first time she felt safe. Her voice broke softly. "You could have left me." Jack's reply was blunt. "Could have," she swallowed. "Why didn't you?" His gaze stayed on the street. "Because I know what it feels like to be left." The words pierced deeper than the knife. Emily thought of every face she had ignored, every person like him she had walked past without care. Shame burned hot in her chest, mingling with gratitude. She whispered, "Thank you." 2 words, fragile yet real. Jack glanced at her briefly, his nod almost imperceptible. For him, that was enough. Far-off sirens wailed, growing closer, Emily's relief mixed with dread. Soon, lights and uniforms would swarm, and this fragile truth would vanish. They would look at him and see rags. They would look at her and see wealth, and whatever had formed between them would be dismissed. She turned quickly. "What's your name?" He hesitated, as though unused to the question. At last, he said, "Jack." She repeated it softly, committing it to memory. Jack, not homeless, not vagrant, a man. The sirens neared. Rusty barked once, tail twitching. Emily's pulse spiked. She wanted to speak before the moment ended. "I won't forget this," she whispered. Jack's jaw tightened. He had been invisible for so long. Could he believe her? Her eyes held his, fierce despite her pallor. For once, he wanted to trust someone's promise. For once, he wanted her words to be true. Headlights flooded the street. Men in dark suits rushed toward her, shouting her name, wrapping her in coats, speaking into radios. Their eyes flicked to Jack with suspicion, some with disdain. To them, he was no savior, just another shadow. But Emily clung to his sleeve, her grip weak yet unyielding. "He saved me," she declared, her voice cutting through the chaos. Silence rippled, undeniable. Jack stood stunned, her words echoing in his mind. For years, he had been no one. Tonight, in her eyes, he was everything. Red and blue lights flooded the street as security swarmed. Hands reached for Emily, voices stacked over one another. Radios crackled with codes. Jack stepped back on instinct, shoulders hunching, the old urge to vanish tugging hard. Rusty pressed his leg, uncertain. Emily, pale but steady, tightened her grip on Jack's sleeve. "He stays," she said, clear enough to cut through the static. One guard hesitated. Another frowned. But she was Emily Carter. Her word had weight. The ambulance doors swung open. "Both of them," she added. A pause, then a nod. Jack blinked, stunned, and climbed in after her. Inside, antiseptic air replaced rain and diesel. A medic clipped a pulse ox to Emily's finger. Another irrigated the wound. She winced but kept her gaze on Jack. He sat ramrod straight, as if trying to make himself smaller. Rusty curled under the bench, nose on paws, watching every hand that came near. The medic glanced at Jack's torn knuckles. "You need stitches?" Jack shook his head. Emily spoke first. "If he does, he gets them." The medic shrugged and returned to work. Emily let out a slow breath. For the first time since the attack, she felt the ground under her. The ER glared white and humming. Nurses moved like tidewater. A triage clerk started to block Jack with a reflexive "family only." But Emily, already on a gurney, lifted her chin. "He's with me." The clerk swallowed a retort and waved them through. Jack's eyes tracked every exit, old habits mapping escape routes he didn't intend to use. They settled him in a chair outside the curtain. Rusty sank to the floor, tail thumping once. Moments later, a doctor lifted the curtain, took one look at the bandage, and said, "Whoever tied this saved you a lot of blood." Stitches, tetanus, a sling. Pain dulled into a manageable throb. Emily dozed, woke, found Jack still there. The clock crept past 4 a.m. A nurse appeared with paperwork, and that look a blend of curiosity and judgment. "You sure you want him listed as a witness?" Emily didn't blink. "I want him listed as my rescuer." The nurse's pen paused, then scratched the word down. When the curtain fell back into place, Emily studied Jack's profile. Wary, tired, braced for rejection that hadn't come. "Thank you," she whispered again, as if the words could hold the edges of the night together. Morning dragged media with it. Headlines bloomed on phones. Billionaire CEO survives alley attack. Mystery Good Samaritan intervenes. Camera crews camped outside like winter birds. Emily's COO called 3 times. Her PR chief texted 50 words about optics, liability, narratives. Emily silenced the phone. When the hospital rep suggested a press statement without the homeless angle, she laughed, humorless. There is no story without him. She looked at Jack. "Do you want to vanish?" He rubbed Rusty's ear, eyes down. "That's what I do." She nodded. "Then we do this on your terms. No close-ups, no last names, just truth." They slipped out a side entrance into brittle winter Sunday. Emily insisted on a ride, but Jack shook his head, pointing toward an underpass he called home. A city worker had wedged pallets against the wind. A blanket lay folded with surprising care. Rusty trotted straight to a dented bowl. Emily took it in the neatness, the dignity wrestled from scraps. She set a paper bag on the pallet. Clean socks, protein bars, a new leash. "This isn't charity," she said, reading his flinch. "It's a thank you." Jack nodded, unsteady. Gratitude and pride wrestled in his throat. Pride loosened its grip first. Days ripened into a complicated quiet. Emily's board buzzed like a disturbed hive, demanding a tighter security protocol and a measured statement. She gave them both and added a line no one expected. Carter Dynamics would fund a pilot program partnering with shelters to train safety marshals from within the homeless community. Lived experience saves lives, she told them. Voice even. Mine included. A few directors bristled. Most recognized a winning narrative and nodded. After the meeting, Emily sat a long time in her office, city spread below like circuitry, wondering when she had last felt something this simple and right. At dusk, she found Jack near the river, Rusty worrying a stick into splinters. The sky held a bruise of violet. "You eating?" she asked, setting down 2 coffees and a sack of warm sandwiches. Jack half smiled. Better than usual. They ate on the low wall. A commuter train stitched light across the water. "You could let me pay you," she said finally, careful with the words. "Consultant, street safety, de-escalation, no strings, W-2, above board," Jack's jaw said. "I don't do offices." "Neither do I," she said softly. "Not at night. Just be where people need you. Teach us." The first day was awkward. HR fumbled over forms for someone with no address. Security eyed Rusty, who wore a brand new service dog vest with startled dignity. Jack kept to corners, took stairs instead of elevators, listened more than he spoke. But in a training room with fluorescent buzz and cheap coffee, he stood in front of 40 guards and 3 executives and said, "If you look past people, they'll look past you too. That's when bad things happen." He showed them how to read posture, how to mark exits, how to speak like a door held open instead of slammed shut. By lunch, the head of security ex-military, built like a Volt, asked Jack to walk the perimeter. They traced blind spots, lighting failures, the alley where Emily bled. Jack crouched and measured with his eyes. "Here's where it turned," he said, touching the scar in the concrete where the knife had skittered. The guard scribbled notes, skepticism melting into respect. Inside, Emily watched from a window she rarely looked through. She didn't step in. She let the city breathe through him, let the building learn a new way to stand. Rusty, tongue-lolling, patrol like he'd been hired to. The first paycheck unsettled Jack more than any knife. Numbers lined up like a language he hadn't spoken in years. Emily slid an envelope across a cafe table. He stared at it, then at her. "What if I mess it up?" She stirred her coffee, smiling crookedly. "Then we try again. That's all any of this island." He nodded, but fear still scratched. That night he bought Rusty a stainless bowl and a bed that puffed when you pressed it. Under the overpass, he set them down with ceremony. Rusty circled twice, flopped, and sighed like wealth had finally learned his name. Local news kept asking for the hero. Jack avoided cameras, turned down 3 interviews, said no to a book scout with polished shoes. Emily honored every boundary. When she spoke publicly, she said only this: "A man with nothing saved me. He didn't ask who I was, he acted." That's leadership. Stock tickers bobbed, op-eds bloomed, hashtags did what hashtags do. Donors called about the pilot program. A few critics sneered about stunts. Emily slept through the noise for once. When sleep faltered, she replayed a different reel. A hoarse whisper, a mutt's growl, a stranger stepping between her and a blade. One afternoon, a quiet test arrived. A junior engineer, anxious and brilliant, froze during a fire drill. Panic chewing through her breath. Crowds pressed. Alarms screamed. Jack saw it from the far end of the corridor. He didn't shout. He took a knee in front of her, let the world shrink to a human scale. "Look at Rusty," he said, voice soft as thread. "Count his breaths." She did. Her shoulders loosened. He walked her out, step by steady step. Later, Emily watched the footage alone and cried in the dark. Not for danger past, but for the future it suggested. Spring arrived with thawed gutters and pigeons arguing on ledges. Emily offered a studio apartment near the river, short lease. Modest, clean locks. "It's just a door," she said. Jack stared at the key like it might bite. He tried it that night, retreat bag still packed. The room smelled faintly of paint and new beginnings. Rusty did 3 exuberant laps, then face planted on the rug. Jack stood at the window a long time, city glittering like thrown coins. He sat on the mattress edge, shoes still on, and whispered to no one, "Don't run." In the morning, he was still there. They kept a rhythm. Mornings on the loading dock, coffee in paper cups, Rusty holding court with warehouse guys, afternoons walking routes with security, evenings sometimes quiet, sometimes not. Emily learned the names of people she'd only known as roles. Jack learned he could be in a room without facing the door. Once, they returned to the alley. The stain in the concrete had faded under rain and time. Emily touched the wall. "I thought I was untouchable," she said. Jack shrugged. "Everybody's touchable." She nodded, not chastened, just human. Rusty chased a pigeon and lost gloriously. The past does not surrender without a fight. One night, Jack didn't answer his phone. He didn't show for a training. Panic crawled Emily's spine. She found him under the river bridge, sitting on cold stone, paycheck uncashed in his pocket. "Too loud," he said, not looking at her. "Too much." She sat beside him, silence making space. Rusty settled between them like a stitched seam. "We can make it smaller again," she said at last. "Smaller is okay." He nodded. The next day he returned. The day after that, he taught a session on what to do when the world tilts. Summer crept in with street festivals and warm asphalt. The pilot program expanded. Shelters sent candidates with steady eyes and scarred knuckles. Jack trained them gently, like someone remembering his own first language. Emily stood at the back, learning to let go of control where it didn't belong. At a small ceremony, the city handed Jack a certificate with a seal that shimmered under lights. He held it awkwardly, as if it might dissolve. Reporters wanted an anthem. He gave them a psalm. "We're not problems, we're people. Sometimes we just need a job and a door that opens." On a Sunday, Emily invited Jack and Rusty to her penthouse for dinner. Simple food, too many forks. Jack hovered at the threshold, boots suddenly loud. Rusty sniffed the air like a sommelier. They ate on the balcony, city fanned below. "I don't fit here," Jack said, half apology. Emily shook her head. "Neither do I, most days." He laughed, surprised. They talked about bad coffee and good dogs, and how some nights feel like cardboard and others like a clean sheet. When they said goodnight, Emily didn't try to turn gratitude into debt. Jack didn't try to turn debt into escape. Autumn colored the river copper. Emily's scar softened into a pale line. Jack's hands healed to calluses. The program hired 8 more marshals. Complaints in the district dropped. An investor asked Emily why she cared about this population. She said, "Because I'm alive." At the studio, Jack hung his first picture frame, Rusty asleep, tongue out. A square of sunlight, blessing his ear. He taped the ER bracelet behind it. Not a trophy, a reminder. When nightmares came, he touched the frame's edge, counted Rusty's breaths, and waited for morning to arrive like forgiveness. Winter returned, soft and sharp. On a quiet night, they walked back to the warehouse district, past the brick wall where a whisper began it all. Snow grained the air. Emily tucked her hand into Jack's elbow. Rusty trotted, leaving monkish prints. I used to think saving someone meant erasing the bad parts, Emily said. Jack shook his head. Sometimes it means sitting with them until the bad parts don't win. They stopped where headlight ghosts still lived in memory. Emily looked at him not as a savior or symbol, but as Jack. Thank you for not disappearing. He smiled. Thank you for seeing. And under the old streetlight, the city felt, for a moment, like home for them both.